you miss me?
Due to an attempt on my life by a brain-eating virus, which failed by the way, so think twice about it next time, yeah? I wasn't able to play 7-Point Highlander last week. Instead, I bided in my lair, orchestrating the implements of my foe's demise. How did it go? We'll get to that, yeah? In the meantime, I'd like to address the fact that some of you had some strong opinions on my particular build of mid-bug. Apparently, a 2-mana 4/4 with lifelink is a perfectly fine fail case for a card which wins the game on its own, and I'm bad at card evaluation for thinking otherwise. Now, much as I enjoy being facetious on the internet, and I do enjoy being facetious on the internet, I do have to accept that maybe the people who beat my ass blindfolded with half a pack of unsleeved playing cards might know something that I don't. So I went back to the deck and really examined the functionality, the core that drives what the deck is trying to do. First of all, a handful of cards that I'd categorized as threats don't actually put pressure on my opponent's life total. Things like Tamiyo or Lily. These cards still win the game on their own unanswered, but if I'm already struggling to put bodies into play, I felt like these cards were not going to help. I wound up cutting Lily and Grief since they both have common use cases which are both quite slow and card negative. When I initially went through to replace them, I settled on Glisser and Kasi Revenant, but that brought about a new problem. Really, it was an existing problem, but it made that problem more obvious to me. All my threats are at 3 mana. This isn't the end of the world, they're all great cards and well worth the 3 mana investment, but it does mean I can't reliably multi-spell until I get around 5 lands. This explains why I always felt so choked on mana. With my stripped down mana base, that wasn't going to happen until turn 7 or later in most games. Realizing I had a creature curve more kinked than a hose in a lawnmower, I scrapped the initial changes and went back to the drawing board. This time I added in 2 extra lands, bringing it up to 21, cut out my worst card draw spells so I could fit in the combo pieces, and added Fairy Mastermind. As a 2-mana threat, I can hold up alongside Counterspell. I also tucked in Unearth as a little treat, and a way to create a threat for less than 2 mana. Revisiting the sideboard, I took out a bunch of the homeless cards to add in things that would do their jobs just a little better. Boseiju and Witherbloom came in from the main, and I also decided to try out Culling Ritual as a way to hit aggro or low-curve artifact decks without harming my own board too much. Getting into the gameplay, I started the night by telling myself that if I had the option between deploying a threat and interacting with the board, I'd deploy the threat every time. I still didn't win any matches, but I did lose in new ways, which looks like progress if you squint real hard and have brain damage. The games were way more competitive, and there were a few moments where I came within touching distance of closing it out. Round 1 was the Jund matchup, in which I was introduced to a particularly strong 2-mana threat, Scythecat Cub. I was able to kill and reanimate it, but my opponent eventually started turning the corner with their own Miracle Max. While I did draw into Worldly Tutor, they had a Keen-Eyed Curator, which prevented me from effectively utilizing my own Miracle Max or Uro. I wound up getting Tasiga, and exiling my entire graveyard left me with no cards in hand, but a head on board with the possibility of drawing a lot when I untapped. We came to a really interesting breakpoint here. My opponent's at 5 with a Barragoyf and 3 other cards in hand, and attacks with his Miracle Max, even though I have a 5/6 Tasiga and a 6/6 Scythecat Cub. He could have any number of things in his hand. A burn spell, a reanimate spell, another creature, and by allowing the damage to come through, I could play around all of them. But then, I'm at 9, he has a Barragoyf in play and 3 cards in hand, and I'm not blocking his 4/4. I wound up making the block with Tasiga, and he had all of the above, pitching a Pyrogoyf, which he then reanimated with Miracle Max, which he reanimated with an Animate Dead. I lost pretty quickly after that. Game 2, I had a good start with Tamiyo and Psychic Frog, but my opponent got a lot of pressure out of Miracle Max reanimating Scythecat Cub. Here, my resolution to slam threats bit me on the arse, since I spent a turn deploying Uro instead of Abrupt Decaying his Cub, which I'd forgotten had Trample. He followed up with a Ren and 6, which doubled the counters up to a 12/12, and I had to put my entire board under the Cub. I lost pretty quickly after that. My round 2 opponent started off strong with a turn 1 Ruin Crab, and gotta be honest, I had no idea what was going on, but I was here for it. I managed to stick both Grist and Oko, and using Grist to make tokens and Oko to embiggen them, I started putting a lot of pressure down, also controlling the board with their other abilities. Then, they resolved Brightglass Gearhulk, got Fast Bond and Zuranorb, and suddenly I can lose the game at any moment. Fortunately, they played it pretty slow, presumably not having any Crucible effect, and I was able to close out the game before they found a win. Game 2, they led on Guide of Souls, and I chose not to misstep it in the hopes that I could hold on to it for Fast Bond instead. I turn 1 Inquisitioned them and saw Walking Ballista, Brightglass Gearhulk, and Ocelot Pride. Here I took the Pride. In retrospect, that would have been a perfectly fine misstep target, and I should have taken the Ballista, especially since they then drew into Heliod. I was able to interrupt the Ballista kill by top-decking an Infernal Grasp at the literal last possible moment, but that just let them put Springheart Nantuko on the Brightglass Gearhulk, and there's no way I'm coming back from that board or value. I got ahead early in the final game, mainly because Leovold drew me approximately 1 million cards off of their turn 1 Hedron Crab, but it came down to turns, and on turn 4 I have Troll of Khazad-dûm, Leovold, and 4/4 Unlicensed Terse. They only have 1 blocker. They're at 7. Between Brainstorm and Lorien Revealed, shuffling with a Polluted Delta in between, I'm able to draw 6 cards. I have Witherbloom Command and 1 untapped land. They go to 1. Neither player finds a win. Round 3, I got to face off against my nemesis in Grixis and see a way that they can actually lose. I kept this hand and immediately got hit with the turn 1 Dreams of Steel and Oil, taking the Fairy Mastermind, of course. This led to a really interesting game, especially after I drew a Force of Will, which they then saw with a Gitaxian Probe, where they knew if they tried to deploy a threat, I could stop it from resolving. So neither of us could really do anything for a lot of the game. That is, until I drew Grist, whose passive allowed him to sneak past a Force of Negation, and then completely lock down the board. At this point, I made a mental note. All of these counterspells are purely for protecting Grist. Later in the game, though, I chose to burn both Spell Pierce and Daze to make sure that a Baragloif resolved. By then, my opponent had 6 lands, which makes these sort of Force Spike effects pretty hard to get any value out of, but it was still probably a mistake, since Grist already had the board on lock and was going to win eventually. I didn't need the extra pressure from the Baragloif. What wound up happening is that my opponent was able to Deadpool it. I had to down-tick Grist to trade them off. To be honest, the game was mostly over at this point anyway, but it's a good reminder not to be too impatient. Guess who lost half the video cause the mic came unplugged? Game 2, my opponent got an early Psychic Frog that I just didn't have an answer for. I did manage to draw into a Drown in the Lock, but he just exiled his graveyard with the flying ability, and I snuck it under the restriction. Game 3 was the most tense game of the night. My opponent started beating me down with an early Darcy, and when I stuck a Baragloif to stabilize, Deadpool came down and stole all of its text. I managed to sacrifice it after just 1 turn cycle, chump Deadpool with a Fairy Mastermind, and go to 2 off the Darcy Swing. I untap, and in my upkeep, on turn 3, after the round timer is ended, I Worldly Tutor for Metamorphosis Fanatic. Cast it, getting back Baragloif. Now I have 10 points of life-linking power in play. With my last mana, I Fatal Push Darcy, and neither player can find lethal in the next 2 turns. My final round was a matchup I was actually really excited for. See, Hamish has been practicing with Eldrazi for a few weeks now, and while it's a deck that I've heard about a lot, usually as a meta role player with a strong Grixis or other mid-range matchup, it's not a deck I've actually had a chance to play against. Game 1, I was able to Abrupt Decay an unused Mana Vault and stick an early Baragloif, which was larger than both Worldbreaker and Oblivion Sower. But I couldn't mount enough pressure as he chump blocked with his 5/7s, and eventually Ugin came down and wiped out my board. Game 2, I hand attacked away Ugin and managed to get an early Oko into play, but Oko went down to a Devourer of Destiny trigger, Abstergo Entertainment got back Ugin, and even though I countered the Ugin, the Exile trigger still wiped out the last vestige of my board. Even though it was my worst beat of the night, it was still really cool to see what it is about Eldrazi that makes it work and makes its Grixis matchup so good.
Had never realized how many cards in my deck said or less until I played this match. It also gave some context to a bunch of cards in my sideboard that I've never actually had a chance to bring in before, like Infernal Reckoning. Turns out, even a 1-mana exile spell is not enough to win a game on its own, especially since the thing that you're killing with it usually already got a Vindicate down. You really need the pressure to back it up.
Now that I've played my deck a bit more, I'm starting to get a more solid handle on what I want each slot to do. For instance, Fairy Mastermind should almost definitely be Dothy Voidwalker. I mean, the card itself is fine, but it's just so non-threatening. I mean, like, look at him. I mean, this is the Barry Blue Benson looking ass.
The reason I'm not on Keen-Eyed Curator or Outland Liberator, even though I like both cards, is to limit my commitment to green. See, I really enjoy the blue-black playstyle and the core that provides, and being 2+1 colors rather than full-on 3 color just makes the 8-point mana that much easier. That said, I also have some stuff in the sideboard that could do with some changing. Things like Counter Squall should be Force of Negation, should probably be main deck, honestly, and I've got a line on a Force of Vigor, which ought to help against Moons and Tron post-board. Unearthed was pretty underwhelming, and it should just be another 1 or 2 mana threat. Entomb as well was pretty unconvincing for me. As for the gameplay, it was good to start getting an understanding of what it looks like to be too aggressive.
It's way easier to tell when I've burned too many resources playing to the board than it is to see when I've been too patient. And I'd much rather toad this line of being just patient enough. As I get a better feel for the deck, I've also realized that a lot of my threats do take a while to win the game. And so I'm coming down on this strategy of rushing out onto the board very quickly and then interacting once I've stuck a threat.
Speaking of patience, I was definitely snapping off my Reanimates a little too early. A turn 2 Scythecat Cub is one thing, but reanimating an Ocelot Pride when my opponent already has a Guide of Souls in play so it can never attack is just a waste of a point.
I'll be doing a little tuning going into the next week. Things like I got to play Stock Up for the first time and it just did not feel like a good use of 3 mana in this shell. But for the most part, I'm adjusting to the playstyle that this deck is really demanding of me. So hopefully with a bit more practice, I should be able to start getting some wins.
Until next week, good luck, have fun, and may the best wizard win. Maybe if I could stop going to time so often.